Welcome to the Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborn. And on this podcast, we interview successful business owners for them to share atomic, impactful lessons that they've learned throughout the course of their business and share them with us so that we can all learn together. As always, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way that established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects. And we use this method to actually book 26 qualified leads and sales calls in 10 days without any ad spend, outreach, in the social media posting, or any of the old, ineffective traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat that will be in the show notes below. But on today's show, it's my pleasure to have Brian Anthony. Brian is the owner of Elevate, where they provide executive revenue growth and leadership to the technical staffing industry. So Brian, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you here. And I want to start off by asking you a question that I always love to start with, which is this: if you were somehow able to go back in time to when you started your either this business or maybe your very first business, but knowing what you know now, what would you do different in the first 12 months?
Well, first of all, Jason, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Um, Great question. I think that for myself, right, it all goes back to the very basics of sales. And that's, where we were all brought up was, for me, what would I do in the first 12 months? It would be consistent with my outreach and be consistent with my day to day, just like I always had my teams, right? And it's funny because you see when you're on this side of it, you see the chaos that can develop in a day and basically take control of your day. So, I think that the right answer here for me is I would like to have that consistency in my day and not let the chaos bleed into it a little bit.
Yeah.
That's where I think in all business, that's where you're generally going to find the pitfalls and the downfalls and the lulls, right? Um, and it's funny, I preach it and I know it and I've taught teams it and I do it myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really common thing for sure. What's something that you've done to help minimize, because it's not something you can, get rid of completely, but what's something you've done to minimize being distracted by the chaos that happens, team requests coming in, stuff happens, client issues, just there's a million things we could list off that happens throughout the day. But what have you done to help minimize that to maintain your focus throughout the day?
Yeah, and one of the lessons that I've preached throughout my whole career to my teams, right, is you have to be planned. It's the hardest part of all of our jobs is the planning piece, right? But once we're planned, execution, I mean, I would assume that everybody who sits in their seat and does what they do, you're talented enough to do that role. So
Mm.
it's about executing that role. And the first and foremost way to do that is to have a plan, stick to the plan. I'm not saying be so rigid that, oh, I'm going to call block from 11 to 12. If a client calls, don't take the client call. I've heard that in my career. It's like,
Whoa.
that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say. What are you talking about? Don't take a client call, right? Um, I've set my teams up. We're a solution, right? We're always going to be a solution to our clients. If our client calls and the solution's not available, it's just like you and I. If if you and I blew out a tire, we're gonna call an auto body shop or a tire shop. If they don't pick up, what are we gonna do? Just hang up and call back in 3 hours? No, we're gonna call the next one on the list, right? So,
Yeah.
I think don't be rigid in your plan where you're not taking the most important, you're pausing on the most important aspect of it. But if the plan is in place, you can take what trumps that time on your schedule, and then go right back into it. That's the step that needs to happen, right? It's you take care of the trump card, and then immediately you need to go right back into doing what you were doing. And I think that that's where a lot of us fall down. It's we don't get back to doing right exactly what we were doing.
Yeah.
But if we stick to that plan and follow that plan, you're gonna find the consistency and you're gonna maintain consistency. And when you do things at a consistent level, you're usually going to find high success.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the key thing you said around that is the consistency. Sometimes people beat themselves up if, as you said, they block something out, but something higher priority comes in place. And that's the key thing, making sure it's higher priority as opposed to just busy work. And that I think is a whole lesson in and of itself to learn. But it's that consistency piece. So it's talking about the consistency side. Um, what are what's the biggest lesson you've learned in being consistent? And advice that you would give around that?
Perfect. I love telling stories, and I think when you tell stories, it gives a little bit more color and detail to the whole process, right? So,
Yeah.
I think a perfect example is I had a recruiter who was working for me, um, and she was by far one of our top recruiters, and she consistently hit KPIs, and KPIs are just drilled into people's minds, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that in a lot of cases, when you don't know what that KPI actually means, it turns into a bad thing. Like if you have a KPI, you need to know what the OKR for it is, right? You need to know what that
Hmm.
result is going to be because that's the result is success, not the activity. The activity
Hmm.
leads you to the result, which it all correlates.
Yeah.
um, but she called me on a Friday night, much like it is for you right now at about 4:30 my time, 5 o'clock my time, and she was crying. And she was like, I only had 9 submittals this week. Yes, our KPIs for the week are higher than that. And at her level, she should have been considerably higher than that. But you pause, right? Let's pause and take a look. How many submittals did you have last week? She, well, I had
Yeah.
40. And I know you had 40. That's why I'm asking a question. That's an amazing week, right? So you have a 40 submittal week. The next week, we're probably going to start looking at you're going to have a lot of interviews to schedule. So, how are you recruiting when you're prepping people for interviews, debriefing on interviews, looking for the next step from either the client and or the candidate? Like you can't work 120 hours a week, right?
Mm.
And we should probably get you an assistant, but that's never going to happen. Um, so, I think that we see consistency there, right? KPIs aren't showing that. It's showing a high and a low. But when you take a look at it and you take a look at it through, a quarter, a 13 week, or let's look at the last, let's look at H1 at this point, right? And see what did the numbers look like? Like that's when we start looking at what do our numbers look like? What do the results look like? Are they correlating the right way? Right? Because
Mm.
that's when you can start to pivot and make impactful changes, right? I'm
Yeah.
not going to sit there and talk to her and be like, you only had 9 submittals. What's wrong with you? It's let's diagnose it. Why did you have 9 submittals? You had 9 submittals because you had an amazing week the week before, and your activity for this week was not recruiting on requirements. It was the next step in that process from the week before. So,
Yeah.
I think that that's the consistency that we often overlook, especially you know, when people who are managed and not led
Mm.
start to really focus on KPIs, but don't understand everything that entails. You call somebody and you're crying, right?
Yeah.
But we pivoted real quick, and it's like, hold a second, hold on a second, and I'll just use a random name, and I said, Jen, pause. What happened this week and last week? Right? I knew the answers, but you get them to get there on their own, and then the light goes off, and then they understand. Wow, if I look at my 13 weeks, this consistency has been amazing, right? It's that's why when we read talking with sales teams or you're talking with recruiters, we don't always have to set normal KPIs as the goal for the week, or normal um, OKRs as the goal for the week. It could be, this week I want to make sure I do this. And it's like, all right, well, that is good, but why do you want to do it? Well, if I do this, it's going to lead me to this result. Excellent. Let's make sure we hit that. We'll check in a couple days, in a day or two, right? I think that's the difference. When you're managed, you see those KPIs and you kind of live by them. You don't understand them. But when you're led, you really truly do take that entrepreneurial mindset to your whole desk. And that's the
Yeah.
one thing we have to do to make our people better. And when we do that and the people get better, guess what happens? The numbers get better. Let's stop talking about the numbers and start focusing on the people.
Yeah. I love that. I
Long-winded
love that.
answer, but I'm passionate about that.
Yeah. And I love it. It's great. It's great. Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question I often ask. It's a little bit of a pivot, but I want to ask you because I love the context in which you give stuff and the answers. And I know we're running close to the end of time here, but I'm really curious about your answer around this. So I always, not always, but oftentimes I ask a question around the challenges we have in business because we all have them. It's a part of business. We can feel like we're the only one that's ever gone through this challenge before in the whole, in the whole world, but obviously it's not true. And so I like to ask this question because it helps normalize it. And people listening can kind of go, oh, okay, gosh, we all have challenges. So having said that, what's the number one biggest challenge that you faced in your business? It can be in any area, but what's the number one challenge you faced, and what's the lesson that you learned from that?
I think the number one challenge that I find on a daily basis is you can get buy-in from the people, but it's very difficult to get buy-in from founders, owners, presidents, people who started their own businesses. That's effectively what I'm doing. I'm helping staffing companies who have plateaued, right? And that 20 million to 50 million dollar range. And I've gotten 3 different divisions to over 100 million. That's the 1% in the staffing industry. I've done it 3 times. And it's easy for me to go in and see the problem and fix the problem. But when I walk out the door, I know that the problem is not fixed because you're trying to fix teams, but you also have to fix their leadership. And their leadership is usually the owner, the founder, the person who started that staffing firm. And, to sometimes get them to change the way they do things is it's not going to happen, because that's why they've asked me to come in, right? But you would assume that uh, that they would pivot and they would make the change, but I think that that's the toughest part, right? Because it's they see the instant pivot that happened, right? And they see, hey, in the last month over month, we grew 5%. Since I've come in the door, we grew 5% month over month, and 10% and 15%. Hey, you fixed everything. It's all fixed. No, it's you're the one I need to fix. But everything else is working because these are great people. You hired great people. You just need to motivate them the right ways, or lead them the right ways, and you're managing them. So it's, as zebras doesn't want to change its stripes. Everybody, I hate that saying, but it really turns out to be true.
Yeah.
I think that that's the biggest challenge. It's knowing that when I walk out the door, you should have kept me. And
Yeah.
I understand that everybody has a budget, and so for some of these companies, it's rather expensive, but the people deserve good leadership, and that's also what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I've never looked at it as growing the numbers. I've always looked at it as, let's grow the people, because the numbers will follow. And if we
Yeah.
really take ownership in that and stop talking to them, how many calls did you make? How many meetings did you make? You can have those conversations as a leader, but that's a manager asking those questions. A leader will say, How was your week? How are you? How are you doing? You know, what challenges did you have this week?
Hmm.
Let's talk about it, because now I'm learning too. I'm learning a little bit about you. I'm learning about
Yeah.
maybe some things that we can quickly pivot. So, I think that changing the people who are actually revenue producing is the least hardest part of the job. It's changing the founder, leader, owner mindset.
Yeah.
Um, that is the most pivotal piece. And they're just not interested in that. They want to see the numbers. The numbers are great. The numbers look good. Bye. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
call me in 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge. And it's a human factor, right? And
Yeah.
that's always going to be the biggest challenge.
Exactly. Yeah. But I like it that, it's a really honest answer. And I think it's one that I think a lot of owners, leaders can reflect on and say, well, am I actually willing to change? Because um, who we are to have gotten the business to where it is, we may have to change to get it to the next level. As a matter of fact, it's not if we need to change, we will need to change. We need to grow, and so it's understand that. So yeah, that's a great answer, Brian. Well, for people that are looking to learn more about what you do and how you can help them, you've already talked about how you go in and help companies, but for people that are wanting to know about that and maybe have a chat with you around that, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So you can go to elevateum.com. You can book an appointment right on the website. You can go to my LinkedIn, Brian J. Anthony. I think it might just be Brian Anthony at this point. I think I took the J out. Um, you can book an appointment right on my LinkedIn. And feel free. I love connecting, talking with people. I can't sit here and say I love changing the people and not want to talk to people, right? We're in a people business. And if we, keep it about the people, we're generally going to see the success we're looking for. So elevate your gtm.com or my LinkedIn and, grab 30 minutes of my time. And I'd love to connect.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I definitely recommend everyone to reach out to Brian on either his LinkedIn or the website that he mentioned, particularly if you're in the industry that he helps, because you can hear how passionate he is and how much he wants to help you out with that. So, Brian, thank you so much for being on the show today, taking our time and just sharing really very open, honest answers. I really, really do appreciate that. And yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate everything.
Likewise, Jason, I appreciated your time and thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries, man. And as a reminder for everyone listening, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, of the new way that established businesses are creating reliable acquisition channel conversations with their ideal prospects that doesn't rely on any of the old, ineffective traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. So to find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. But until next episode, stay inspired.